On today's episode of Locked On 76ers, as Philadelphia takes the road to Brooklyn for game number 3, now we wait to see what the reserves, or the role players, if you will take their talents now, as they like to say, on the road for game number 3. Will they be a big impact from those guys in Brooklyn? We'll talk about it next, right here, Locked On 76ers.
You are Locked On 76ers, your daily Philadelphia 76ers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome again, Locked On 76ers. This episode is brought to you by again, Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. And again, welcome. You are Locked On 76ers. I'm Devon Givens from 97.5 The Fanatic Radio in Philadelphia, alongside my co-hosts and partners, always from theinquirer.com, Sixers beat writer Keith Pompey. What's happening, Keith?
What's popping, D? What's popping, bro?
Not much, man. 2 days off. 2 days off. That's what it is for the Sixers. So we wait for game number 3. That's what's happening. And before we get started, talk about quite a few things. We got to thank everybody for making Locked On 76ers your first listen every day. And remember, Locked On 76ers is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube at Locked On 76ers. Well, Keith, we need to talk about the role players and where they factor into things as they hit the road for game number 3 on Thursday. We also need to step in and talk about some similarities, maybe some parallels here as the Sixers go on the road for game number 3. Same spot that they were a season ago, where they were up 2-0 after defeating the Toronto Raptors in Philadelphia 2-0, and they need a big basket in the very end to win the game by their franchise player, their MVP candidate, Joel Embiid. We'll talk about that. And we haven't discussed any of the other games around the series, around the NBA in the playoffs, so we'll tap into some of that. We'll get into that all right here on Locked On 76ers. But Keith, you are absolutely right, man. Games 1 and 2, we saw some really good play from the bench. And Paul Reed, Jalen McDaniels, game 1, you had those two guys play well. And then in game 2, they played well once again. DeAnthony Melton and George Niang shot the ball well and decently enough in game number 1. Didn't, see much from George Niang in game 2. He didn't make a shot at all. But at home, you typically see players play better when they are those role players. And we saw it on the other side for the Brooklyn Nets. And they don't have to be a bench player, Keith. They could be starters. Nick Claxton didn't play well in the starting role, right? Royce O'Neal off the bench. He did not shoot the ball very well in the first 2 games. Joe Harris, same thing. So when we're looking at that as a piece of how teams win in the postseason, something to keep an eye on potentially for game 3 tomorrow?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it definitely is. I mean, it's one of those things where, especially in the playoffs, it's a whole lot easier when you have people cheering for you than cheering against you. You know what I mean? In a hostile environment. And for that reason, typically role players tend to play better at home, and some of them struggle. So to me, that's the thing that you really want to pay attention to. Like the first game, I felt like the Sixers reserves and role players really benefited from the energy that the crowd gave them. The second game, it wasn't so much, some of them, but I think a lot of that has to do with, when you're up and you win by 20 points and you come back, you might be a little bit not as locked in or as like, oh, we got to get them like you were before. So, but this is something that people really need to pay attention to, is because how is George Niang going to play? How is Jalen McDaniels going to play going into his first real playoff game on the road? What about DeAnthony Melton, the guy who has struggled in the past in the playoffs? How is he going to deal with it? Same B-ball Paul. So I think that's something that we really need to pay close attention to.
The environment, I think, plays a big part in it too. Toronto was nuts last season, and we know that that was a crazy, crazy place to play. And Paul Reed showed some decent signs on the road there. George Niang has been there before, so understanding with that. How much, when you talk about Brooklyn and seeing Brooklyn, The last time they were there was what, 2018 playoffs, when in the first round, for that first round matchup with that team, Dinwiddie, Karis LeVert, D'Angelo Russell. That was that group, and the Sixers won on the road. Different team, but having been at Barclays in the playoffs, I have not. That's why I'm asking you. Having been at Barclays in the playoffs, how crazy can it be for an opposing team?
It's I guess it's hard because it happened so long ago that I don't really remember it like that. You know what I mean? But I will say that all playoff atmospheres, it goes up a different notch just because every play matters, so to speak. It would be completely different if they were playing in Madison Square Garden. Let me tell you that. Like, the people would really get into it.
Mm-hmm.
So they could get a little bit of a pass, but at the same time, it's still going to be a bunch of people yelling and screaming at you after every possession, and they're going to get at them. But in regard, it's funny because, Toronto, as electric as it was, I can't say that that was the best atmosphere. I will say this about Miami, though. We can say this about Miami. Miami is typically a place that you go to on the road and you're saying, where are the people at, right? But last year, because even we're talking about Miami, last year, it was on fire. I mean, it was just on fire in the playoffs, how they got after them. So, you know what? If I base it off of that, then you talk about Brooklyn, maybe it's going to be something similar. Who knows? The only thing about Brooklyn is funny is, like, when you think of Brooklyn, the people in the crowd aren't from Brooklyn or from the Brooklyn you thought about. So it's a little like different. You know what I mean? So that's the biggest thing. But you know what? I think it's still going to be an electric atmosphere for
Okay,
them.
we'll see how hostile it is for the Sixers, and especially to see if the players, the reserves, the role players there in general, including guys like PJ Tucker as well, who's seen it all, but a role player overall. We'll see how they respond on the road. We'll come back and we'll get into some other things here with the 76ers, and that is, as we look at this basketball team, how are they similar, Keith, from last year, the path that we saw them take, the Sixers taking on the Raptors in round one, winning game two, going into game three. We just talked about hostile environment. How different or how similar are they? And we'll get into all that next right here, Locked On 76ers. Well, I got to tell you guys and gals about Ultimate Pro Basketball GM. It's the coolest game I've played in such a long time. I've always thought that I could be a great NBA GM, and as it turns out, it's not all that easy. Well, if you have had the same thought and have fantasized about managing your own basketball franchise, go and download Ultimate Pro Basketball GM right now. The game allows you to manage every strategic aspect of a franchise, playing through seasons, leading your franchise and fans to a glory as you build your historic dynasty in the simulation you're responsible for, and that is by dealing with challenging personalities of players and coaches, hiring the right coaches and assistants, trading and trading players, making draft picks, navigating your franchise through free agency draft, all the ups and downs of multiple seasons. And this is, of course, in a challenging and realistic game world. Ultimate Pro Basketball GM is completely free and playable offline. Play on the go as you want and when you want to. I've had my team again since we started this a few weeks back, and it's been fun to navigate things. And I can't wait to. I know we're winding down, even though the playoffs are just starting, winding down. So I would love to be able to have this going from the beginning of the season, and I just really enjoy it in that way. And I think you would too. So, Locked On 76ers listeners, for you get 100% free boost to your franchise when using the promo Locked On in the game store. So make sure to check it out. To download the game, just visit probasketballgm.com, scan the code, or look it up in the App Store. That's probasketballgm.com, Ultimate Basketball GM. Start your dynasty today. Thanks for making Locked On 76ers your first listen every day. Everydayers. Tomorrow on the show, we preview game number 3. We'll preview it, break it all down, some mismatches, some matchups that we would like to see, maybe some game plan things that they have to adjust. We'll do that all tomorrow right here on Locked On 76ers. All right, Keith, game 3 in Brooklyn, 7:30 tip time. We have been here before last season with the Toronto Raptors. The 76ers needed a Joel Embiid buzzer beater from the left wing along the sideline, three-pointer, fading out of bounds, nailing it to walk off and win the basketball game. Do you see any parallels from what we saw in game 2 and remember from what we had in game 1 and 2 against the Toronto Raptors that maybe makes you think, hey, Toronto took them to the wire in that game and they needed that shot. Brooklyn could very well do the same thing.
No, I don't. Well, here's the thing. The reason why I'm saying I don't is because if you remember that one, that series was crazy because Toronto had injuries. Like in the first 2 games, key players didn't play, right? And then we had the Matisse Thybulle situation where he was an unvaccinated player and he couldn't play in Canada. So even though the 76ers went up 2-0, it was kind of like, okay, Toronto was undermanned. Nick Nurse was complaining about the officiating. And then all of a sudden, you don't have your best perimeter defender playing in Toronto. And that's how Danny Green got in the starting lineup, remember? So to me, there's really not a lot of parallels to that because of that. I think the Sixers got a good idea of what Brooklyn is going to be able to do, how guys are playing. It's just a matter of adjusting to them. And then also, I don't think the Sixers are as like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do without a guy? It's kind of like saying, we're not going to have Tobias or PJ Tucker. What we're going to do without him. So I don't really see a lot of those parallels with that. Now, again, that was a phenomenal game, and Joel had to hit that buzzer beater and things like that. But I also felt like that this team, this Toronto team, unfortunately, last year Toronto team had a lot of success against the Sixers up there in the regular season. And they used, they had a lot of interchangeable players. They were doing it. This year is, I don't know, it's just a lot of different vibes because of the newness to this Brooklyn team.
Yeah, and I do think that since we talked about the role players being on the road, Brooklyn, and similar to the Sixers that we talked about, they're coming home now. So are we going to see a different Nick Claxton? Those other players that I mentioned, Royce O'Neal, and who else? Maybe Day'Ron Sharpe comes in and helps out. Joe Harris knocks down a few more shots. What we do see is something similar where Brooklyn does keep the game close. Their star player, Mikal Bridges, and maybe even Cam Johnson, they continue to play well. And the other guys find their rhythm being back at home, being energized by that crowd, and making sure things go that way so they get that positive bump. I could see it. It's the playoffs. Anything can happen in that way. So I could see it, especially with some changes, because look, they're going to have to do something different. They may still have the same principles of their defense where they're going to double team Joel Embiid, sometimes triple him with those players, but they're also probably going to back off a little bit, and maybe you'll see something different with how Brooklyn does things that could turn it up and push the pace. James Harden didn't play well in game number 2. Does that continue in game number 3 where that's something that they can play off of and maybe have some positive results as a result from that, again, being back at home? You never know. You never know how things go. We've already seen teams win on the road in the postseason, which we'll get into in our final segment, but stranger things have happened. So it wouldn't surprise me one bit if that happened and they got stung a little bit. And are the Sixers going to look past the Brooklyn Nets first half here in Philadelphia? You know what I mean? It's kind of like they sleptwalk in that one a bit, and no disrespect to Brooklyn, but it seemed like they sleptwalk a little bit and Brooklyn was able to hang around and do what they did early on. Will that be the case for the Sixers where they maybe overlook their opponent in their building on Thursday? So I see it similarly, Keith, but maybe a little bit more where I feel like they can get stung there early and look past this team. So we'll talk about some of the other things that are happening in the NBA playoffs next in our final segment right here on this Wednesday. Locked On 76ers. Have you ever been, beating yourself in the head about buying tickets? You're having such a problem figuring out how to get tickets to a concert, show, an event, a comedy show, basketball game, baseball, whatever, sporting event. and trying to get them last minute also. Well, buying tickets to your favorite event shouldn't be stressful. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater that's near you. Game Time is the fast and easy way to get those things with killer deals on last minute tickets and their best price guarantee. You can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun that you'll have at that particular event. Well, what are some of the things that you may like about the Game Time experience? Well, I'll tell you. Flash deals, last minute tickets, images of seat views, lowest price guarantee, even cancellation protection, job loss protection, etc. You'll be fine. Game Time is the place for last minute ticket deals. So get exclusive flash deals on tickets for football, baseball, basketball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. All of that stuff is in play currently right now in the month of April. We're in that part where, except for football, you can get those other things right away, right now on the Game Time app. You can also, as the fastest growing ticketing app in the country, they are for a reason. Tickets are sent directly to your phone, so you never have to dig through your email. Very convenient. Here's what you do. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, Keith. There's been some fun basketball games going on in these other series. The potential matchup with the Sixers, Boston and Atlanta, taken care of. Brooklyn, Boston is up 2-0. Nothing has really surprised me there. They've blown the Hawks out in the first two games. They are going to move on, Boston, at some point. Then we look at the other Eastern Conference matchup. Miami stung Milwaukee in game number 1. I was very surprised about that one. How about you?
Yeah,
and you have the Giannis part with the injury.
You know what? Yeah, I was surprised. I mean, yeah, I was surprised. I mean, even with the Giannis injury, the way that Miami looked against Atlanta, you know what I mean? And then, they bounced back and clinched the 8th spot in the play-in tournament. But, I was really shocked. I mean, because, Giannis is a great player, but then you also look and you say, okay, but they have a deep team with Chris Middleton, Drew Holiday, and guys coming off the bench. And I just felt like that, them being the best team in the league, that they would be able to beat Miami. But hey, Miami has Jimmy Butler. He comes up big and clutch moments. And I just felt like, that's what happened. They just did it. Now, again, they also lost Tyler Hero, and he's going to be gone for the rest of the season, basically. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, I was a little shocked by that. And I know Giannis went out, but I was shocked that they lost.
Yeah, and Miami is Miami, though. So that's where a lot of people, when you did that poll before the playoffs and you asked what opponent that you wanted from the fans, and they went with the Brooklyn Nets over the New York Knicks, the Miami Heat, for this very reason that hey, that it works that way there for the Milwaukee Bucks and the Miami Heat, because Miami can get you playoff tested, all of that. Kevin Love played really well in that game as well. That was a little bit of a surprise for me. Even though Miami is Miami, I thought Milwaukee would still take care of things. And now they have a problem with no Tyler Hero. They're going to have to make up for that in his absence. Giannis, I'm sure he'll play. If he doesn't play in game 2, he'll play again eventually in the series with the back issue that he has. How about out in the West, man? Anything surprise you? The Kings up 2-0 against the Golden State Warriors. Clippers and Phoenix, they split last night. Phoenix won. And that one, the Eastern Conference game, Knicks and Cleveland. Cleveland won in game 2 after dropping game 1 at home to the New York Knicks. Anything else surprise you, stand out in these other matchups?
I mean, I guess the one series that I shouldn't say surprised me, but I did expect Golden State to beat Sacramento in this series, just because I felt like they were like the big brother, so to speak, and the little brother is still learning how to play ball and you're taking advantage of them. Mm-hmm. I felt like they had that mental thing on them, right? But now you look at it and you're seeing how they're playing. They're not backing down. And then you look at, Draymond getting suspended for game 3. and it just seems like things are imploding on them. I have to say that has been a little surprising to me. Like before, I thought, I mean, again, we talked about home and away games, how role players play. So I expect Golden State's players to play better in game 3. But the fact that they're losing Draymond, who's very integral to what they do, I think we can see Sac go up 3-1 and probably win this thing in 5 games at home. So, to me, that has been surprising, even though it shouldn't be because they're the number 3 seed playing a number 6 seed. But
This
it's
is
been
surprising
surprising.
for me just because those guys as a group and their leader and De'Aaron Fox has never been in the playoffs.
Yeah, yeah, and then
First time
also
together.
you would think that, I hate to say this, but you would think that Golden State, and I know Draymond goes Draymond at times, but you would think that Golden State would have more composure winning all those championships. And you have to imagine how electrifying, like, when you going back at it with the crowd and stuff like that, like, that's good. You're telling them like, I'm here, I'm not going anywhere. But in a way, it could really turn against you because you're getting the crowd hyped up. You know what I mean? If
Are
I'm,
you surprised that he was suspended? Did you think it was just going to be a fine?
you
What
know
did you?
what, here's the thing. Like, I think that I'm not surprised he's suspended. No, because the thing is, I mean, he stepped on the guy's chest. Now if they wanted to do something, do you suspend both of them because the guy was holding on to it? But he stepped on his chest. I understand he got the fine. People were saying like, well, maybe the league is not going to suspend him because his getting kicked out of the game kind of cost them the game.
Mhm.
They were saying all that, but then all of a sudden it's kind of like, if you're Sacramento, you're looking at it like, oh, okay, we see it. NBA, y'all want to make sure that Golden State doesn't get eliminated. I mean, we see it. So I feel like they had no choice but to do it, especially since he stepped on the dude's chest and now the guy has a bruised sternum. So, I wasn't surprised. I wasn't surprised.
Okay, yeah, I thought that they would fine him, just fine him big, but not suspend him because it is the playoffs. But reputation and the fact that Adam Silver was in the building, I think that played a big part in it. All right, man. Well, listen, great as always to be here with you. We thank everybody for making, checking out Locked On 76ers and making it your first listen every day. Every day or tomorrow on the show, we will preview game number 3. Keith, do you mind letting the good folks know where they can find us?
Like my man said, wherever you get your podcast, you can get this podcast. It's free and available. But when you go to our YouTube channel, make sure you click on the Liberty Bell. All right. Locked On 76ers YouTube. Click on the Liberty Bell. That way you become a new subscriber. And not only that, you get notified whenever we have new podcasts. Tonight, do yourself a favor and make sure you listen to my man D on the Divine Giving Show from 6 p.m. to midnight. The Divine Giving Show from 6 p.m. to midnight. And then what also you can do is make sure you follow D on Twitter at DivineG975. DivineG975. You follow me on Twitter at Pompey on Sixers. And you can also read my stuff in the Philadelphia Inquirer at Inquirer.com.
Absolutely. Well, listen, man, as always, thanks, Keith. Thanks to everybody out there, and we'll talk to you tomorrow. Appreciate it.
Peace.